Hibernation is a strategy that some of the animals here at the Nature Center use to survive the winter. We talk about hibernation now in the fall because a lot of animals are preparing for their hibernation. There are many different types of hibernation, and there are different terms for those different varieties of hibernation. For our purposes here, we're just going to say that hibernation is a long, extended period of sleep. And that is employed in order for these animals to survive the winter. So, what do animals do in the fall in order to prepare for hibernation? Well, it depends. There are many different varieties of animals that use this strategy. And so we'll start with mammals. We have a couple of mammals that are true hibernators. To be a true hibernating mammal, you have to prepare your body for hibernation, and that oftentimes includes finding as much food as you can right now during the fall season. In the fall, true hibernating animals will spend a lot of time foraging, finding food, putting on body fat, and then they're going to use those fat reserves to sustain themselves during their hibernation period. So the two most common true hibernators here in Ohio are groundhogs and bats. Both of those types of animals are true hibernators. They'll be spending time now acquiring body fat by eating as much food as they can, and then as the weather starts to cool, they will enter the place where they plan to hibernate. They will settle in, their body temperatures will drop, their heart rate drops dramatically, so their heart only beats maybe a couple of times a minute, and they will sleep all throughout the winter. And so it's an extended period of sleep with very little body activity. So that is what true hibernation is. Now, a lot of our other animals, like amphibians and reptiles and all of the invertebrates like insects and spiders and millipedes and centipedes, they also have to hibernate. But again, there are different varieties of hibernation depending on who they are and where they live. So just very quickly, with reptiles, they hibernate because they're cold-blooded. And the same is true with all of the amphibians and the insects and spiders and other varieties of invertebrates. Cold-blooded animals cannot function in cold weather. Their body temperature drops below a point where their muscles won't work. They, and maybe in some instances, can't even breathe because their bodies become too cold and become inactive. So their strategy is to hibernate until the weather warms up again. And that could be in late January, when sometimes it warms up really early and then it gets cold again. Those animals can wake from their hibernation pretty quickly when their body temperature increases. We see that a lot, especially with insects. So they hibernate as a strategy because their bodies just won't function in the cold weather. So aquatic reptiles and amphibians, those that live in the water, will almost always hibernate somewhere in or near the water. That's important to them. That's where they find their food. That is their preferred habitat. And so that's where they're generally going to hibernate. The reptiles and amphibians who live on land, things like box turtles and snakes, they will hibernate in their preferred habitat. So here at the Nature Center, we have mostly forest. So the garter snakes, the milk snakes, the black rat snakes, they will hibernate somewhere in the forest floor. It could be an abandoned chipmunk burrow, it could be an abandoned groundhog burrow, it could be inside of a hollow tree or underneath of a fallen tree. You can see I've got a big hollow tree over my shoulder here, and then there's a really big fallen tree on the forest floor behind me as well. So these are places where reptiles may find a safe place to hibernate for the winter time. Same with our woodland frogs like wood frogs and spring peepers and the gray tree frogs, and also for the many types of salamanders that live in our forest. Now, last but not least are the insects and the other invertebrates. There's so many varieties of them, it's almost impossible to cover them all in a short video, but you should know that they do hibernate. And depending on the kind of animal, whether it's a butterfly or a housefly or a mosquito or a grasshopper or a cricket, depending on the kind of animal, they have different strategies and they hibernate at different stages of their life. So it's pretty common for butterflies and moths to hibernate in the form of either a chrysalis or a cocoon, and that's in their pupa stage. And it's pretty common for them to survive the winter that way. There are a couple of butterflies that hibernate as adults, but it's less common than those that hibernate in a chrysalis or a cocoon. There are other insects that hibernate as adults. Mosquitoes are one, flies are another, millipedes and centipedes. They will all hibernate in the form that they are in right now, entering the fall, and then when it gets cold, they find a safe place on the forest floor, and that's where they will stay until it warms up again. Same thing is true with spiders. Spiders will largely hibernate as adults. Things like crickets and grasshoppers, we see a lot of them right now, starting in the late summer and then all throughout the fall. We see and hear a lot of crickets and grasshoppers. That's because they're busy right now laying eggs. And so they will actually survive the winter in the form of an egg. So wherever the egg is deposited, that's where they will stay, and then that egg will hatch in the spring when the weather warms up again. So there's all kinds of really neat survival strategies when it comes to hibernation, depending on the type of animal that is using it and needs to use it. Many animals must hibernate because they have no other way of surviving if they do not. So that's just a little bit about some of the animals and how they hibernate